The greatest battlefield in life is not external. It is internal. It is not the war that is fought with swords, guns, or armies, but the silent battle within the human soul where the mind and emotions wrestle for control. If your emotions dominate your decisions, you will be unstable, inconsistent, and easily manipulated by circumstances. But when your mind governs your emotions, you live as a person of stability, self-control, and wisdom. The ability to train the mind to rule over feelings is one of the most important disciplines you can ever master. Every human being is created with emotions: joy, sorrow, anger, fear, compassion, and excitement. Emotions are not evil, they are indicators. They reveal what is happening in your soul. They are like the lights on the dashboard of a car, signaling that something inside needs attention. But imagine if the warning light itself took control of the steering wheel. You would end up in a crash. That is what happens when emotions, instead of the mind, direct your life. The design of the mind is to govern, to analyze, to choose, to direct, while emotions are meant to support, to energize, and to give expression to those choices. When this order is reversed, chaos follows. Think about how many people make lifelong decisions in a moment of emotional weakness. They walk out of marriages in anger. They quit jobs in frustration. They sever friendships in hurt. They spend money in excitement only to regret it later in despair. They choose relationships out of loneliness instead of wisdom, and then wonder why pain follows. The truth is, emotions left unchecked are like wild horses. They run fast, but without direction. The mind must take the reins. Training the mind to control emotions begins with awareness. Many people live unaware that their reactions are being hijacked by feelings rather than guided by thought. The moment you recognize that your emotions are rising, that is the moment you must remind yourself, my mind was built to govern. Discipline is born at the point of recognition. Without awareness, you will always confuse your emotions with reality. You will assume that because you feel afraid, you are in danger. Because you feel rejected, you are unloved. Because you feel discouraged, you are defeated. But feelings are not always truth. The mind must separate fact from perception. One of the most dangerous myths people believe is that emotions are uncontrollable. They say, "I just couldn't help myself." That's how I felt. But emotions are not beyond your control. They may rise suddenly, but your response to them is always a matter of choice. A trained mind acknowledges the emotion, but decides the action. Anger may rise, but the mind chooses whether to lash out or to pause in silence. Fear may stir, but the mind decides whether to retreat or to step forward in faith. Excitement may overflow, but the mind chooses whether to spend recklessly or invest wisely. When you train the mind, emotions become like winds that fill your sails, but the mind holds the rudder that keeps the ship on course. This is why meditation, reflection, and intentional thought patterns are so important. They are exercises that strengthen the authority of the mind over feelings. If you never take time to discipline your thoughts, your emotions will always dominate. Just as the body needs training in order to be strong, the mind requires consistent discipline in order to maintain control. Reading, studying, and rehearsing principles are like lifting weights for the mind. They condition you to think before you act, to pause before you speak, and to evaluate before you decide. Consider the difference between reaction and response. Reaction is emotional, response is thoughtful. Reaction is immediate, response is deliberate. Reaction is driven by the heat of the moment, response is guided by wisdom. The mind that rules emotions is always more inclined to respond than to react. And the more you practice responding, the stronger your inner discipline becomes. Over time, Emotions lose their power to control you because your mind has been trained to keep its seat as the driver. Another key in this training is to remember your long-term vision. Emotions thrive on the immediate. They scream for attention in the present moment. But the mind, when disciplined, sees beyond the now into the future. It asks, if I act this way today, what will it cost me tomorrow? That is why vision is essential. When you know where you are going, you are less likely to let temporary emotions derail your journey. The mind uses vision as an anchor, reminding you that feelings pass, but consequences remain. When you live with your emotions unchecked, you are like a puppet on strings, pulled this way and that by every passing circumstance. But when your mind is in charge, you cut those strings and become free to choose wisely. Freedom is not the absence of emotions, it is the mastery of them. You cannot stop waves from coming, but you can learn to surf them. You cannot stop feelings from rising, but you can train your mind to guide how you respond. True maturity is measured not by age, but by the ability to govern oneself. And governing yourself begins with mastering your inner world. When your mind takes its rightful place of authority, emotions no longer sabotage your destiny. Instead, they become allies, adding passion to your purpose and energy to your decisions. Your mind is the gatekeeper. Your emotions are the guests. If the gatekeeper sleeps, the house will be overrun. But if the gatekeeper is alert, the house will be filled only with what supports its strength. The process of mastering emotions cannot begin until you learn to recognize what ignites them. Everyone has emotional triggers. Words, actions, memories, or situations that stir up intense feelings, often without warning. These triggers are like hidden landmines buried in the soil of the soul. You may walk confidently through life, but when someone steps on the wrong spot, suddenly anger explodes, fear overwhelms, or sadness floods your heart. The mind must be trained not only to govern emotions, but also to identify these hidden triggers before they take control. Triggers are formed by experiences, both past and present. For some, a harsh tone of voice awakens old wounds from childhood, stirring anger or defensiveness. For others, a moment of silence in a conversation triggers insecurity, making them believe they are being ignored or rejected. A setback at work may remind someone of previous failures, causing discouragement to surface. A delay in achieving a goal might awaken feelings of inadequacy or fear of disappointment. Triggers are not always logical, yet they are powerful. Until you recognize them, they will continue to dictate your responses in ways that sabotage your progress. The first step in mastering triggers is self-awareness. Many people walk through life blind to their own patterns. They repeat the same reactions over and over, not realizing that certain situations always provoke them. They say, "I don't know why I got so angry," or "I can't explain why I shut down," without understanding that there is a predictable cause behind the reaction. Self-awareness means slowing down enough to ask, why did I react that way? What was the thought behind the feeling? What memory or belief did this situation awaken in me? These questions shine light on the hidden triggers, exposing them so they can no longer operate in the dark. Another important reality about emotional triggers is that they often expose areas of unresolved pain. What provokes you the most usually points to a wound that has not healed. If someone's words of criticism crush your spirit more than they should, it may be because past experiences of rejection still linger in your heart. If disappointment easily drives you into despair, it may be because you have not yet learned to separate your worth from your performance. Triggers are not only obstacles, they are also signals pointing you to areas of growth. The very moments that stir your strongest emotions can become opportunities for healing and transformation if you are willing to confront them instead of denying them. The mind's role in this process is to pause and analyze. The undisciplined person reacts impulsively, but the disciplined mind asks questions. Why am I feeling this? Is this about the present situation, or is it about something deeper? What principle should guide me here, rather than just my emotion? By questioning the trigger, the mind reclaims authority over the heart. Instead of being dragged into an automatic reaction, you can choose a deliberate response. Consider how many relationships are damaged because people do not understand their triggers. A simple disagreement escalates into a heated argument because someone's pride was touched. A casual comment creates distance because it stirred old insecurities. Families, friendships, and marriages can fracture, not because of major betrayals, but because of repeated emotional flare, uprooted in unrecognized triggers. But when you begin to identify your patterns, you gain the power to interrupt the cycle. You can tell yourself, this feeling is familiar. I know where it comes from. I will not let it dictate my response. That awareness alone can transform the way you interact with others. Recognizing triggers also requires humility. It is easier to blame others for how you feel than to take responsibility for your own reactions. You may be tempted to say, they make me angry, or they always make me feel small. But in truth, your emotions are your responsibility. No one has the power to make you feel anything without your permission. What they do may be wrong, but your response belongs to you. When you stop blaming others and begin taking ownership of your triggers, you step into freedom. The mind must remind the heart, I cannot control what others say or do, but I can control how I respond. Triggers lose power when they are exposed to the light of reflection and replaced with principles. For example, if rejection triggers feelings of worthlessness, the mind must be trained to affirm the truth your value is not defined by others' acceptance. If failure triggers fear, the mind must hold fast to the principle that failure is not final, but part of growth. If criticism triggers insecurity, the mind must filter it through wisdom, discerning what is useful for growth and discarding what is destructive. The mind's strength is in reinterpreting the trigger, reframing it so that it no longer enslaves you. Over time, as you consistently practice recognizing and reframing triggers, your emotional world becomes less reactive and more stable. Situations that once provoked anger will no longer disturb you in the same way. Words that once pierced deeply will lose their sting. Delays or disappointments will no longer derail your confidence. You will begin to notice that the same scenarios arise, but your response is different. This is the evidence of growth. The trigger still appears, but the reaction has changed. Life will always present challenges, conflicts, and disappointments, but when you recognize your emotional triggers, you rob them of their hidden power. Instead of stumbling over the same stones repeatedly, you learn to step over them with strength and wisdom. Recognition is the beginning of mastery. The mind cannot rule what it does not see, but once it sees, it can choose. And when choice replaces reaction, you begin to live with a freedom that emotions alone could never give you. Emotions by themselves are unpredictable. They rise and fall with circumstances, with the mood of the moment, and with the weight of past experiences pressing on the present. If your life is governed by emotions, it will always be unstable because emotions shift like the wind. What you need is an anchor, something steady, unchanging, and immovable. That anchor is principle. Principles are eternal truths, guiding laws that do not bend to moods, opinions, or seasons. They remain the same regardless of whether you feel joyful, sad, angry, or afraid. To discipline the mind is to train it to be ruled by principles rather than by fluctuating emotions. Think of the difference between a person who lives by feelings and one who lives by principles. The first is like a leaf blown about by the wind, up one day, down the next, depending entirely on circumstances. The second is like a tree rooted deep in the ground, swaying in the storm but never uprooted, because it is anchored in something deeper than the weather. Principles give you that root system. They hold you steady when emotions attempt to drag you into decisions you will later regret. Discipline begins when the mind commits itself to values that are greater than emotions. For instance, honesty is a principle. If you live by emotion, you will tell the truth only when it is convenient. But if you live by principle, you will tell the truth even when it costs you. Respect is a principle. If you live by emotion, you will treat people kindly only when you feel like it. But if you live by principle, you will treat them with dignity regardless of your mood. Responsibility is a principle. If you live by emotion, you will fulfill obligations only when motivated, but if you live by principle, you will remain consistent even when you are tired or discouraged. The disciplined mind constantly reminds itself that feelings are temporary, but principles are permanent. This is why training your thoughts requires constant rehearsal of truth. You cannot depend on memory alone. You must reinforce principles through meditation, repetition, and application until they become your automatic response. Just as athletes drill the same moves repeatedly until their bodies react instinctively, so must you train your mind with principles until they become your default setting in moments of pressure. It is easy to make wise choices when emotions are calm, but discipline is tested when feelings run high. That is when principles prove their power. Anger tells you to strike back, but principle tells you to pause and seek peace. Fear tells you to retreat, but principle tells you to stand firm and move forward. Desire tells you to indulge, but principle tells you to wait for the right time. Without principles, you will always be at the mercy of how you feel in the moment. With principles, you can rise above the moment and act with wisdom. Principles also protect you from manipulation. People who live by emotions are easily controlled by others because all it takes is a word, an action, or an appeal to their feelings to change their direction. But those who live by principles cannot be swayed so easily because their decisions are not rooted in how they feel about a person or situation, but in what is right. Discipline allows you to set boundaries, to say no when necessary, and to remain true to your convictions even when others pressure you. One of the most powerful ways to strengthen discipline is to establish a vision of who you want to become. When you have a clear sense of your identity and your destiny, you can measure your emotions against your principles. The question becomes, does this reaction align with the person I am becoming? Does this decision move me closer to my purpose or pull me away? Vision provides focus, and principles provide structure. Together, they guide the mind to rule over the heart. Principles must also be applied consistently, not selectively. It is not discipline if you only apply it when convenient. Discipline means holding to the same standard in all situations. If respect is a principle, then you respect everyone, not just those who treat you well. If excellence is a principle, then you pursue it in small tasks as well as in great ones. If patience is a principle, then you practice it when waiting for small things, not only when waiting for big ones. The mind that is trained in this way develops strength, stability, and character. It is also important to understand that principles are not dependent on emotions, but they do influence emotions. When you live by principle, your emotions eventually align with your decisions. At first, it may feel unnatural to choose patience when you feel angry, or honesty when you feel afraid. But over time, as you consistently act according to principle, your emotions begin to submit to the authority of your mind. What once felt difficult becomes natural. What once felt like sacrifice becomes a source of peace and strength. This is why discipline through principles must be practiced daily. It is not a one-time choice, it is a lifestyle. Each day presents opportunities to either let emotions lead or to let principles lead. Each small decision trains the mind one way or the other. If you consistently choose principle over emotion, your mental strength grows. And with that strength comes freedom from regret, freedom from instability, freedom from being controlled by circumstances. The difference between those who live in frustration and those who walk in peace often comes down to one simple ability, the capacity to rise above reactions. Life will always present situations that provoke you, tempt you, or push you toward an impulsive response. But maturity is found in the person who refuses to be a slave to the immediate and instead chooses to live at a higher level. Living above reactions means developing the strength to pause, to reflect, and to respond with wisdom rather than with raw emotion. It is the practice of mastering the moment so that the moment does not master you. Every day, countless opportunities arise that test this discipline. Someone cuts you off in traffic and anger demands that you respond. A co-worker makes a careless remark and pride urges you to retaliate. A family member disappoints you and frustration pushes you to lash out. Disappointment, rejection, criticism, or betrayal, all of these are sparks that can ignite emotional fire. The question is not whether these sparks will come, but whether you will allow them to burn out of control, or whether you will contain them by the strength of your mind. Reactions are natural. Everyone feels them. But the key is not to be ruled by them. To live above reactions is not to deny that you feel hurt, anger, or fear. It is to recognize the feeling without allowing it to dictate your behavior. It is the ability to acknowledge, I feel this emotion, but I choose not to act on it blindly. This separation between feeling and action is the essence of self-control. When you can pause between the rise of emotion and the decision of response, you give your mind time to align with principle. That pause is where wisdom is born. The undisciplined life is marked by constant reaction. Reacting is easy because it requires no thought. It is automatic, like striking back when struck, shouting when shouted at, or giving up when discouraged. But living above reactions requires strength because it demands that you restrain the immediate impulse. Restraint does not mean weakness. In fact, it is one of the greatest demonstrations of strength. Anyone can react, but it takes true power to remain calm, to measure your words, and to choose your actions deliberately. Consider how much destruction is caused by unrestrained reactions. Friendships have ended with one angry outburst. Careers have been damaged by a single careless remark. Families have been torn apart by impulsive decisions made in moments of hurt. Nations have gone to war because leaders reacted instead of responding. The cost of reaction is always greater than the temporary satisfaction it provides. Living above reactions means valuing long-term peace more than short-term release. To cultivate this ability, the mind must be trained to slow down. Emotions often demand immediacy. They scream for action now. But wisdom is almost always found in the pause. When you stop, breathe, and think, you shift control from the heart to the head. That moment of reflection gives you space to ask, What is the right response here? What will the consequences of my action be? Will this move me closer to or further from my purpose? By asking these questions, you reclaim the authority to act according to principle instead of being hijacked by emotion. Another vital part of living above reactions is learning the art of silence. Silence is not weakness, it is strategy. Sometimes the greatest response is no response at all. When provoked, silence denies the other person the power to control your state of mind. It creates space for tension to de-escalate and for your thoughts to realign with wisdom. Silence is not passive. It is an active choice to hold your peace until the right words can be spoken. Many conflicts could be avoided if more people mastered the discipline of silence in the heat of emotion. Patience is another pillar of this practice. Reactions are immediate, but responses are patient. Patience gives you the ability to wait until emotions settle before making decisions. Too many lives have been altered by decisions made in the heat of anger, fear, or excitement. Waiting allows emotions to pass and principles to surface. When you delay your response, you gain perspective. What seemed urgent in the moment often loses its power when given time. Living above reactions also requires vision. When you know where you are going, you refuse to let momentary feelings distract you. A person of vision understands that every decision either builds or breaks the future they are striving toward. This awareness makes it easier to overlook offenses, to let go of unnecessary battles, and to rise above pettiness. When the goal is clear, not every provocation deserves your energy. The higher your vision, the less you are willing to waste time on reactions that do not align with your destiny. There is also a freedom that comes with mastering reactions. When you live reactively, other people control you. Their words, actions, and attitudes determine your mood and behavior. But when you rise above reactions, you reclaim your power. You refuse to be a puppet whose strings are pulled by the emotions of others. Instead, you decide who you will be and how you will respond regardless of what happens around you. That is true independence, the ability to remain steady in your character no matter the environment. This strength does not develop overnight. It is built day by day, decision by decision. Each time you choose to pause instead of react, you strengthen your discipline. Each time you choose silence instead of argument, patience instead of haste, forgiveness instead of resentment, you reinforce the authority of your mind over your emotions. Slowly, your default shifts from reaction to response, from impulse to principle, from chaos to stability. The journey of mastering your emotions begins and ends in the mind. From the very start, we learned that the mind was designed to govern, while emotions were meant to serve. When this order is respected, life gains stability. But when it is reversed, chaos follows. That is why training the mind is not an option. It is a necessity. We uncovered that recognizing emotional triggers is the first step toward freedom. You cannot defeat what you do not acknowledge. By shining light on the hidden places where emotions rise, you strip them of their secret power and reclaim authority over your reactions. Every trigger, once recognized, becomes an opportunity for growth and healing. But recognition alone is not enough. Discipline must be built on principles. Principles are the anchors that hold you steady when emotions demand control. They keep you rooted when life's storms rage and guide your choices when feelings are unstable. Living by principles ensures that you act not according to moods, but according to values, not according to pressure, but according to truth. And finally, the practice of living above reactions transforms the way you walk through life. It gives you the strength to pause, the wisdom to reflect, and the maturity to respond deliberately rather than impulsively. It frees you from being controlled by people, by circumstances, or by the highs and lows of your own heart. It allows you to live from the inside out, anchored in vision and guided by conviction. When the mind is trained to control emotions, life becomes balanced, decisions become wiser, and relationships become healthier. You are no longer tossed around by feelings, but instead directed by purpose. This is the path to true freedom, when your emotions no longer rule you, but instead empower you to live with clarity, discipline, and strength. Have you ever found yourself reacting in anger, fear, or frustration only to regret your words or actions later? So many of us lose opportunities, damage relationships, or block our own progress simply because we did not master our emotions. The problem is not the emotion itself, but the lack of control over it. And until you learn how to train your mind to govern your emotions, you will always live at the mercy of your feelings instead of living by principles and purpose.